Hi, everybody. Welcome to Book Talk. This is the Ellen Noel Art Museum's book club. Normally, we'd be doing this in person, but because we're socially distancing, I'm joined today by Irene Perry, teacher at UTPB, and Julie DeLong, who's Associate Professor of English at OC, is going to be leading our discussion. Thank you both for joining me tonight. Mm-hmm. And this is probably, is this going to be backwards? This is our book.
No, you're good.
All right. Mm-hmm. So the book that we're going to be discussing is Strapless, Singer Sargent and the Fall of Madame X by Deborah Davis. All of us have read it. And Julie's going to start our discussion today. Thanks, Julie.
Okay. So yeah, I just want to start the discussion about why the painting is so intriguing to me. I was introduced to the painting in a class in college. We tied it in with like the female or the male gaze a little bit. And why it's so interesting about the position in which Madame X or Amelie is posed in. And I've seen the painting at the Met. Have y'all seen it?
I have.
So big, yeah. It's really cool. And I think one of the other surprising things is that it's not what originally was, what's what we're looking for. It's different than the original. It's been edited, so I think that was interesting as well.
So the one at the Met, is that the second one he did?
It's the revised original. So the copy is the one that wasn't finished, and then the Met is the one that's the revised original, where he went back and scraped off the strapping off and put it back on. I think it's interesting too, because students and sometimes when we look at stuff from the past and they're like, oh, why was this so controversial? It seems so, who cares, or straps falling down a little bit. It's interesting that the reception that it did get in the time in the 1880s. But yeah, because it was such a scandal, and it caused issues for Sargent, but primarily for Madame X or Amelie. So that was interesting as well, as how as the female, she kind of took more backlash than the male artist did.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and I think one thing I was talking about is I liked how this was Sargent's attempt to have a big idea painting. That was something with the salon in Paris in that era, was to have a painting that was not only technically good, but also had some sort of new idea, some sort of big purpose behind it. And before that, he had a lot of really good paintings. He was an excellent portrait artist, but this is the one that really had a big idea behind it. And even at the time, it wasn't really realized, but I think later on, people kind of saw what he was attempting to do with it. What do you all think? So.
I guess I'll talk. I've always liked Sargent, and of course, my favorite is the one of the girls with the flowers and the lanterns. They talk about that later. Carnation, Lily, Lily, Rose, I think it's called. Yeah. And I do think I have seen that on exhibit. I'm thinking it's traveled, but I don't remember for sure. Yeah. So are you asking about the book or the painting, or both?
It's kind of just to start the discussion, whatever you thought.
Okay, well, I've always liked Sargent, and I was familiar with the basics of the story about the strap, but not the bigger context. And that was a lot of fun to learn more about her and about Paris of that time, things like that, and then Sargent's trajectory as an artist.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting too that I think he and Gautreau are very similar in as far as we talk about how they're Americans, and talked about, oh, sorry, my dog's joining me. How they both were Americans. They were both trying to make their way and become legitimate in the Paris scene, and not to be seen as outsiders anymore. I thought it was really interesting, the parallels between the two. So
I was not that familiar with Amelie. But of course, it kind of gives it away in the title when it says the fall of Madame X. So going into it, something bad's going to happen. Wasn't surprised that she took it harder than he did.
Yes.
Because if it would have been equal, we probably wouldn't know who he is.
That's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Come on.
Oh, that's
She was just laying there before, and then she heard people, and she got really excited. So, yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting again. I like too how later on it talks about how she's kept trying to like reclaim this fame that she got, because despite the fact that it was negative fame for her, being kind of like this like fame seeker and this, you know, person who wanted to be like on the front page of all the, you know, tabloids, so to speak, it was upsetting to her to kind of no longer have the infamy, you know, for better or worse.
Did either of you feel like there was kind of a connection to modern day bloggers or celebrities, actresses, of trying to keep that, whether it's youthful? I mean, I was kind of thinking her continuing to try to find different artists to do her portrait was kind of like having plastic surgery or having Botox or self-relevant.
Yeah, some sort of reinventing of the look. Yeah. And yeah, so originally she got, I can't remember his name, but she got the very conventional portrait artist to do her later. She was like, okay, if this one that was so salacious didn't go so well, maybe I'll get a really traditional one. And that ended up being really boring. You know, no one really paid attention to it because it didn't have the notoriety.
I think the style was kind of out of favor maybe by then too.
Yeah, it was a lot out fashion, you know, outdated, sorry. And she just, yeah, no one really was interested in it. And I think she began to realize, for better or for worse, it was better to be infamous than to be forgotten, you know. Yeah.
But she had like 3 other portraits, weren't there 4 altogether?
Something like that. Yeah, there was a bunch. And yeah, none of them had the notoriety that the one that she liked the best, gosh, what was his name?
It's the one that did oh gosh, it's escaping me too.
Was it the one that had the
Gandera?
The back scene? I don't remember for sure.
Yeah. It's by Antonio de la Gandera, Madame Pierre Gautreau, 1897. And that's the one where...
Yes. It's on page 208.
Yeah. And that's the one they chose to display at their home because it was, you know, the most flattering. I think it's kind of an interesting balance of being like sexual and young, but at the same time being like, okay, you know what I mean? Being acceptable, more acceptable than her in portrait.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. They both show her in profile, both those pictures, but one's from the front and one's from the back. I didn't think of it, Annie, you asked about modern day with plastic surgery, but I did think about it with constantly posting. And you can post a selfie really easily, even altered, but you can't do a painting very fast. And so
it's much more affordable.
Yeah, well, affordable, but also the time frame is how long it took. So she could have easily inundated the market with positive images if she was in current time. Whereas, you know, back in the day, it took a long time to get a portrait made. So
I thought it was interesting too that so I just did a paper about memento mori art and how, you know, when photography came about, it was really popular. And you know, because this whole story is, you know, while photography is around, you know, and how it was interesting because, you know, since photography became more of like a democratic mean, like it still wasn't cheap. The paper I wrote talked about to have a portrait done of you was probably about $60 or so, which isn't cheap, you know, especially if you're, you know, lower class, but often your dead photograph would be the only photograph you'd have taken of you in your lifetime if you were poor. But I thought it was interesting that the wealthy were like, okay, in kind of a response to photography, they're like, you know what, we're still going to get portraits done because that shows how crazy rich we are to have a painting done still. So I thought that was really interesting because, again, the research I was doing was more about how photography was taking over, but it seems like there still was a desire to have portraits done.
Did you guys see I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was curious if once the negative press came out, if she had just owned it, like right off the bat, if she could have ridden that wave better, you know, because she initially liked it.
She did.
So that was interesting.
And then like after the response, they're like, oh, this portrait's terrible. Like, you know, it's like, yeah, exactly. It's all about the response that I got.
I think it bothered her more, not just the unflattering response in the beginning, but that she slipped from being really popular and talked about to just kind of obscurity. That was more bothering for her than negative.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It kind of reminds me of like celebrities who are really into being in the limelight. You know, I mean, they'd rather be there than like forgotten, you know. Yeah, and I think there is, and again, it's like she was constantly seeking to be legitimized because she was not French. You know, she was from Louisiana. There was always kind of like that chip on her shoulder about not being truly accepted. And so I think even though she liked the fame, she liked the notoriety, at the same time she knew she never would be accepted into like, you know, that higher society totally. So.
That's kind of a French thing too, though, in general.
Yeah. And same thing with Sargent, you know, he really wanted to be, you know, and that's when he got the portrait of Pazzi, the gynecologist guy, the Lothario. That was about as close as he got, but you know, he really wanted to be in that group and be accepted, but he knew that he kind of always never would be because he was American by birth. So even though his family didn't spend a lot of time in America growing up, and they were traveled all over the place.
Yeah, I did not know that. That was really interesting to me.
Yeah. And he is very similar to Henry James, with whom he had a friendship. You know, they were really close friends, and Henry James thought he was, you know, really talented and did a lot of advocacy for Sargent. I thought that was interesting too, because I know with Henry James, like I remember in a class I took in college, people were like, well, is he American or is he European? It's like, it's hard to remember because he just bounces back so much, and he's such a part of European culture. So
That's true.
Let's see. What about like with his crushes and his sexuality? Like, what were you intrigued by that? Because again, a big reason why he painted Amelie was because he was attracted to her, you know, and it wasn't so much like, well, he knew she was kind of a rising star, but also that he thought, you know, was really attracted to her, saw her beauty is so unique.
I don't know. I think the book had a big teaser in the beginning about that, and I don't think they really ever explored that. And maybe there's just not enough data or information about that to say more than what little was said. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. I kept feeling like a lot of it was speculation.
Yeah. So
almost like historical fiction. She's kind of taking some liberties. She'd say something like, it was believed that, or we suspect that. I'm thinking, well, she doesn't really know either. She's speculating.
Yeah.
But it seems like that was kind of his thing, that he would get infatuated with either the person he was doing the portrait for or the artist he was working with. And that was like a block, because at first he had such a crush on her, he couldn't get any work done.
Yeah.
And then doesn't he go away and they come back together? And then he's kind of like over her, like maybe he's on to the next thing.
Yeah, he said like eventually he had enough put down the canvas that he could go work on it at a studio, didn't need to be around her anymore. And then he was really able to finish the portrait and get some work done with it. Yeah, same thing with his protege. I can't remember his name. Here it is. Belroche, Albert de Belroche. I don't pronounce French very well at all. but yeah, it was his fellow friend, artist, and he drew that profile that was so similar to Madame X's profile. And you know, people like, he kind of like, she talked about how he kind of like layered those, like, and again, like you're saying, speculation, it's kind of like almost like layering of those crushes on top of each other, like these two interchangeable, you know, people for him. It's interesting, like he talked about Oscar Wilde a lot, you know, Oscar Wilde as well, who you know, was jealous for homosexuality, and you know, talked about how Sargent, maybe he wasn't, you know, again, like we don't know, it's not like he was gay, and even at that time it was different as far as how people identify, but it seemed like he certainly did have both female and male crushes. Or at least, like you said, maybe like obsessions as far as like
yeah. I liked the description of how he painted. You know,
yeah,
and thoughts from the canvas, and that was fun to see.
Yeah, 4 miles a day in the studio. I'm like, that's pretty good. So,
that's a lot of movement.
Doing that with self-quarantine. It was pretty cool to hear his process. And I was interested. It was interesting too to learn like what the salon. I didn't know a lot about that, like how it worked.
Me neither. That was interesting.
Yeah, how that kind of was, you know, to win that was kind of like, you know, set you up for fame. And also too, like with Sargent being a working artist, you know, the idea that like, you know, and it talked about, I thought it was interesting, it's like he didn't want to be a starving artist, they said. He wanted to be a working artist, and early on, that the one girl he painted, like the girl with the rose, you know, his mom or her mom was really trying to get that marriage connection. To us, we would think like, oh, an artist that's not a wealthy person, but to be a portrait artist was, like I said, about as legitimate as being like a banker or something.
And in society.
Yeah.
Like the entree that would get to the society. I think that was part of it too, where he was invited. Now, what do you guys think about when the painting was displayed and there was all this uproar over it, when they talked about the other paintings that actually had more nudity, that had actual nudity, compared to this was just, it felt risque because her strap had slipped. What did you guys think about that?
I like how the book explains the difference between like naked and nude.
Yeah.
Like again, like in the class I took when we looked at this painting of the female gaze, and the idea of like, nudity being like, well, first they talk about with nudes, like they often had to be very like, I don't want to say like childlike, but do you know what I mean? Like they were hairless, they were very like demure, as far as they were always kind of like a character from like classical mythology or something like that. They weren't, and that's the same thing, the problem with Olympia by Manet, that came out years before that, was that she was a contemporary woman, just someone people knew, and also her gaze is looking right at the audience, and that was something that it was, that's why that painting was so problematic. And with the strap, it suggests like, never before, it suggests like a late afternoon like liaison, like, they're like either she had just gotten dressed again or was in the process of undressing, and that's why it is so risque compared to, like you're saying, like a nude.
And also that he had contemporaries who maybe had known her, maybe even had relationships with her.
Exactly.
But I also wondered if the risque factor wasn't just a scapegoat, that it really was they were not ready to accept her as the beauty of the year of the salon. And so they used that as the excuse why. I mean, I don't know. So
that's interesting.
There's interesting they talk about like how she looks in the painting. They're like, oh, where her skin looks like corpse-like, and the pose is like really contrived, and like the proportions they said were off. So again, it's like you think about these like classical nudes, they're like very beautiful, very like, the lighting is a lot more like flattering and things like that. And so I think too, it's like, it's a little bit unsettling, the painting,
Well, we know the scale was really large.
Yeah.
My first thought when I started reading the reactions was that, is that something where one person said something negative and then the people just started jumping on the bandwagon?
It snowballed.
The reaction had been positive, would it have gone that way? It just kind of became like popular to hate that painting.
Yes. And I think too, they talk about like with women's responses, and I think like men, like just to not seem unseemly, we're like, oh yeah, the painting's really bad, like they said women, it was a way for them to like distance themselves, like, oh, we're not like that, what I mean, like she is, like this fallen woman, she is, risque, she's bad, we're not like that, and I think it was a way to kind of separate themselves and to have some sort of sense of superiority to her.
So you guys have actually seen the painting. Is the skin color that odd, or is that just something they jumped on? Because you see images and you see the real painting, there's a difference. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I don't remember thinking that it was odd.
Really? Yeah.
Do you, Julie?
I don't think so. We're just thinking like she's really pale, but not really like it would seem like you said, like it wasn't like, oh, that's a weird color for skin. It seemed very pale. Like I just picture her being very pale. Yeah. He did change the color of the background, it said initially. He put like that rose wash over it to make it a little bit warmer. So maybe that kind of helped a little bit. But yeah. I think too, it's like her face or the way her profile is, it's just so like they said, another problem with the painting is that she just seems so like blasé. Like, okay, here I am. She doesn't seem like trying to like put her head down or cover up. She's
not
like,
to her, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, very haughty, yeah. Which again kind of goes to her personality. I would not say she seems like a super likable person, at least to me. But I think too, we can identify a lot with her too. It's like, again, with her trying to stay relevant and also her not handling the idea of aging very well. I think our culture obviously still today is very much like that, What did you all think with that? Like with what did they talk about how she kind of like, how, let's see, where is it? Yeah, it's like, so it talks about how like, she had to keep dyeing her hair, her body had kind of filled out, you know, now she's, the way people talked about her, like they wrote satirical poems about how she's kind of like filled out and gotten heavier. Yeah. It kind of reminded me of, have you guys seen Vertigo?
Mm-hmm.
It's been a long time. I've seen it, but I don't remember, so.
Yeah, so a few years ago, she presented an Oscar, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, she looks terrible. She looks so weird. She looks like, because she's done a plastic surgery. And I love Kim Novak, and I just remember being like so angry about it. I'm like, well, the reason why she's done all these surgeries is to appeal to our culture and to try to keep her young and to keep her look intact. And I'm like, and then we all just, you know, dump on her for trying to stay relevant and trying to stay beautiful, which is what I'm yeah,
that was incredibly sad. Well, in the beginning, when the reviews first came back that were negative, and they were doing all the parodies and cartoons and things and making fun of her, and then as you said later, when she had more portraits done, it was like 10 or 15 years later, then they're criticizing her for aging, which live, that's what you're going to do.
Yeah, right.
I had a lot of sympathy for her. Someone who's basing all of their value on their looks, as she would have. Mm-hmm. You know, she wanted to stay relevant. She wanted to have people still talk about her.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think is, I don't know, it's definitely the human condition. You know, it's not something of that era only. Yeah, and they said like later on in life with the way she dressed, like she dressed like just like lots of like really like billowy kind of like not tight clothing, and then you know she had all the mirrors taken out of her house. It looks Sunset Boulevard to me. I was like,
there was that weird story about when she had visitors and she was like off in her bedroom and she invited the man to come up and he thought she was a statue because she had all the white powder and no lights and
yeah. Yeah, she kind of really always had to try to escape this. They talked about how she, like in 1892, she went to an opera with like her daughter's friend who was 15 years old, and how even then when she's older, like they had to the governess refused an invitation because she knew that Madame Gaudreau had a reputation and might seem unseemly for the boy to appeal alone with her, you know. So it's like
become as a chaperone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And again, I think it's interesting because certainly she wasn't the only woman in Paris in that society who was, you know, sexually promiscuous. You know, they talk about the doctor who sleeps with everybody, you know, and how affairs were so normal. They had like a time of the day. It was seemed to be like your late afternoon, 4 to 5 o'clock, like have your affair, and you know, had certain like cultural, you know, acceptance of, you know, sleeping around. I thought it was interesting that she got punished a lot more for it than most other people did in that era.
Well, they talked about the restaurants that had the special room.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like technically okay because it was in public.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Bring your mistress there.
Just to eat, yeah, just a separate dining room that you could make a girlfriend or boyfriend there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how it was, how like businessmen, it was just assumed they would have, you know, like in their like expenses they had things they had to pay for their mistress, had to get them a house, had to get them, you know, pay for their bills, etc. So I think she just paid like a great price for being who she was. And I think she ended up becoming like a symbol of that era and a symbol of that decadence. And I think that's why it's like sometimes when people are faced with something that reminds them of themselves, it's disturbing, you know? And for them to look at that painting and kind of see themselves in it is going to make them kind of angry, you know, if they understand it or not. But I think that there was something there, like we're saying, that kind of like, you know, kind of bothered them, you know.
There might have been a connection too with her husband trying to have a political career, a failed attempt. He wasn't well liked, so that wasn't helping her.
Yeah. Well, and the two of them did not seem to have any rapport. And then her daughter dies young. I mean, it was very sad. And I don't remember. I read it before spring break. Did she ever have any interest in going back to New Orleans?
It doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, it didn't sound. I didn't notice it anywhere. So.
She was so young when she moved to Paris.
Yeah, I think she was 8. Yeah, very young.
Not had a connection anymore.
Yeah. You know, like her grandmother's plantation sounded fascinating, so I thought that would be fun to go. Check that out. I don't know. So.
Yeah, and it's tough like that year when she lost her daughter, she lost her mom too, and again, she was estranged from her husband. Again, especially as women, we have a lot of sympathy for her. You know, just like her later life, it just sounded lonely and just, you know, a lot of it just kind of living in the past. So.
And there's that whole mystery about the men that she left her estate to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it just seemed like 2 kind of random people. And like, you know, the book said, or, you know, Davis says, like, was it just they were nice to her later in life, and then she was, you know, they kind of just took advantage of that, you know, who knows.
When I first started reading that, I thought it was going to be that it had been a con. And then it turns out, no, it was like she just didn't really have anybody else. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I mean, her daughter died, right? And so, yeah, who else would she have given it to, I guess? So.
Her strange husband, but.
Yeah, right.
Just getting it.
And didn't he give something to the family afterwards? Like the dress and the feather thing that she's drawn in that one portrait that she liked. Didn't he give that away?
Who's Singer Sargent or the husband?
No, the husband. The dress and the portrait that she liked. From the back, there was something where he had given that to the family or something like that. So just kind of washing his hands of the whole thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But Sargent's life I found was very interesting, you know, supporting all of that traveling band of his family and his, you know, his invalid sister. And I mean, that's a lot to take on while you're trying to rise to the top of Parisian society. And I mean, that's a fickle world, I would imagine. So.
Yeah. And he was so young, you know, it's like during all this, he was like in his 30s.
Yeah, that would be a lot of pressure. I felt bad for his dad. His dad was the only one that really wanted to go back. And every time there was a chance, the mom was like, no, I'm going. We're going to stay here. And the poor dad never did get to go back.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting that he became so famous in Boston later in life, too. I guess I just didn't know a lot about that either, about how he was.
I think that was the Isabella Stewart Gardner connection, though.
That was interesting. Yeah. That portrait's really interesting too.
Have you seen that?
I have not seen it in person. I've seen it online. I looked it up. Yeah. Have you?
No.
I guess it's at her museum or whatever. I haven't been there, but yeah, it was interesting because like when they describe the pose, again, it seems like so much more salacious than it really is. But it was funny because her husband, he was so upset about the painting. Like he did not want people to look at it because all his friends were like, "Oh, you can look on our cleavage." So, and by having the pearls around her waist, like that was a very sexualized kind of. And again, the section she usually wore around her neck. I think it was Cecilia. Stop. Hey.
What's Cecilia think of the book?
Oh, she loved it. No. It was interesting that like she was like, okay, I'm not going to put the painting up until after he dies because it really offended him, and she was like, out of respect to my husband. That was the day she died. She's like, put that thing up, you know. So she liked it. I mean, again, she was very. I mean, she loved Sargent, and she also, I think, it spoke to the vanity of her. You know, it's it made her look. I think it was amazing too how well he captured like not only like his subject but also his relationship with them. You know, like with like that first portrait he did of the girl whose mom wanted them to get married. Like
yeah, that was so funny. The like tagline on that, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, no, he doesn't like her. I mean, he doesn't hate her, but
he's not marrying her.
Married. You know, it's like they talked about how like he purposely chose for Amelie a dress that didn't have like the bustle and all that, and you know, just the way she's positioned, holding the flower, it's just not at all. And yeah, it's really interesting about how he was so good at capturing like, a person's essence and simultaneously his relationship with them.
I think it was interesting that he obviously seemed to like the painting, Madame X. I mean, he kept it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's that photograph of him with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
yeah.
Okay, so maybe I missed this, but at what point, at the end of the book when it said he had her name removed, did it have her real name, and then later he changed it to Madame X?
I don't remember.
Because when they said the thing about that was kind of a slam to her that he had her name removed from it. Remember that, Julie?
Yeah, I remember that at the end. I'm trying to remember if it.
So I wasn't sure if it was changed or it was part of it. Well, that's okay. I can look it up.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
I don't remember.
I did think it was interesting though that he did not exhibit it when she wanted it exhibited, and then he waited till after she died, and it's like it was talking about how he kind of had like the final say with it. You know, when she asked for it to be in that show by that German guy, he was like, "No, sorry."
He probably felt betrayed by her because she could have come out and defended it when he first started getting negative criticism. She could have said, "I love it. I think I look great." And that's when her and her mom hopped in and said, "No, it's awful." Yeah. So I think just that she wasn't loyal is probably why he was not going to help her share it with her friends.
Yeah. So
I remember there was something about the frame. What was that about the frame? Do you remember?
Oh, it was a really opulent frame because of the scale.
Yeah.
They talked about how then it was like in this really plain frame, and so they found like another one to put that in because they felt like it didn't really match, you know.
Yeah.
I think it was gold. I just remember them saying they wanted the frame to kind of match the scale and
But
yeah.
Then later it had a different frame, a simpler frame, and they knew about the old frame from the pictures, the photographs. Yeah. And so there was something about the frame change. I don't remember the whole story, but there was something interesting about that, I thought. So
yeah. I guess no. And initially, so it said before he put it like on varnishing day. They had the ornate French frame, the multi-level gold surface, had like a busy pattern and whatever. Portrait de Madame star, as Madame X is called at the time, a polite gesture to keep a respectable woman's names out of the notices and reviews is ready for the salon. So it did not have her name when they first had it. But of course, again, I mean, she's there. Everyone knows who she is.
It wasn't,
you know, that's her. So.
A lot of times when he used X, though, it's supposed to be like anonymous.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What else? Anything else things you noticed or that you want to talk about? I know we don't have a lot of time left.
Well, I like Sargent as an artist. I like seeing his work, and I enjoyed the book, the extra detail about his life, about her life, the backstory there made it very very interesting. I enjoyed that. So I didn't realize, I knew there was this scandal, but I didn't realize that was post-marriage, post-first child, you know, that I thought that was like in her ascent into, you know, that society. So
that's kind of the reason why it was so controversial too. Her being a married woman, her being a mother, you know, I mean, granted, if it happened when she was younger, she probably wouldn't have been very like marriageable. So it's kind of
Yeah, I hope we didn't give too much away. I would recommend this to other people.
Oh, that's true. We gave everything away.
They won't remember. They'll forget it and then they'll read it. I loved her writing style.
Yes.
It's very, very easy to read. Even if a lot of times if I'm really tired and I'm trying to read late at night, this one I didn't have that problem. I could kind of stay with it. It grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
I also liked her descriptions of historical scenes and eras to kind of give context to the actual facts that she was kind of sharing. And that was really interesting to give it a better understanding.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just love this time period and that era, and I love learning more and just like the random things about like the doctor and just like all these different people. And I liked learning that in Proust he has a character based on the doctor, just things like that because I love
all those connections. Me too.
Me too.
You love research for sure. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I know for me at least this was the first time, so hopefully this is we might be doing more of these. And Julie, thank you so much I know you did a lot of work researching and getting ready for this. So anyone, future books or future book talks, we will have posted on our Facebook page. We hope everyone's doing well, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.